Eric, thanks very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce a man that I've been reading and learning from for many years, president of the Herzl Institute, chairman of the Edmund Burke Foundation. He is one of the most important voices writing anywhere in the world on conservatism, Yoram Hazony. Yoram's massively successful 2018 book, The Virtue of Nationalism, was selected as the Conservative Book of the Year in 2019, and it follows previously published books on the Hebrew Bible, the history of Zionism, and much else. Yoram Hazony, welcome back to the Jewish Leadership Conference and our 2021 conference on Jews and conservatism.
John, it's wonderful to be back again and great to see you.
It's precisely this, Yoram, the theme of our conference, Jews and conservatism, that it seems to me brings into focus the family. Now, you're at work on a new book about conservatism in which you analyze the deeper significance of the family, what it is, what it does, what it means, and how the family relates to our larger shared civic life in a nation. In a moment, we'll enter into what a family is, but I want to first establish why a family matters to politics and political life.
Well, the question that I started out with when I began writing this new book, which hopefully, God willing, is going to be out in September or October or something of this year, the question that really troubled me, I think, is one that many people have been asking, is why is it that conservatism is so unsuccessful at conserving anything? I mean, there's been a very powerful movement called conservatism in America, in Britain, in the English-speaking world and beyond. You know, at least since the 1950s, there was a revival of conservatism. Yet, if we look at the trajectory of the societies that we live in, it just seems like decade after decade, there's always some new crazy thing. You know, so now it's the incapacity of the society around us to distinguish between men and women. But it began with well, we don't really need the Bible in the schools, and we don't really need to pray to God. And here it is; it's 2 generations later, and it seems like the foundations have just been erased, and we know for sure that a few years from now, another foundation is going to be erased. So I think now's a good time to ask a general question about this so-called conservative movement. What good is it if it doesn't conserve anything? So that's what my new book is about. And what I try to understand is, what would you need to do if you were going to conserve something? And the place to begin, I think, is with something that people are generally very, very well aware of, which is that there was an argument in American conservatism in the 1950s and 60s about whether conservatism is traditionalism, this kind of Selden, Montesquieu, Burke kind of thing, which sees religion and the nation and the family as being at the absolute center of the things that need to be conserved, or is conservatism just about freedom? And of course, everybody involved in this debate cherishes freedom of speech, freedom of religion. That isn't really the issue. The issue is that in the 1960s, what today is called libertarianism, which is essentially liberalism. It's a worldview that says, really, you don't need to know anything about human beings other than that they should be free and equal, and government should make sure they're free and equal. And if they are free and equal, then you're done. I mean, then you have the best possible society. And that seems to just not be true. There are many people in America today who call themselves conservatives, but they're really liberals in that sense, that what do they believe in? They believe in liberty and equality. If that's what conservatism is going to be about, then as far as I'm concerned, then we might as well drop it, because there is no way to conserve anything like God or scripture, the family and the nation, man and woman, honor and the sacred. None of those things can be conserved if your view of conservatism is freedom and equality are the only things that are important.
So what you're saying, it seems to me, is actually a form of an epistemological argument, an argument about human knowledge, that there are certain things that each generation learns and understands and has the capacity to pass on in the practices, in the institution of a family. And if we were to instead raise that institution to the ground, aware of its deficiencies, its injustices, all the challenges that it presents, and start each generation anew, aspiring to new, pure freedom and equality, we would be losing something of tremendous moral capital. In your view, I take it the family is an institution that helps us preserve the lessons we've learned from the past.
Well, if you think about what children do in the family, the family is set up as an educational institution. I mean, it's true that it does other things. It's concerned with the health and the feeding of children. It's concerned with the security and financing of children. Family does many, many things in our tradition. But really, the principal thing that happens in a family is that the next generation is educated in the ways of the previous generations. Now, we have this kind of strange view today of what people call the nuclear family, where a family, when we think of a family, we're always talking about, father, mother, and a couple of children for 18 years or for 20 years. That's kind of an Enlightenment rationalization of what the family is. The traditional family was never thought of that way. The traditional family is something that has 3 generations in it, maybe 4 generations. And I don't mean that they necessarily always have to live in the same house, but the picture, the image of the family that you see in the Bible is, for example, is always the passage down to the 3rd and 4th generation. Your responsibility when you're thinking about transmitting something forward, you're always talking about the 3rd and 4th generation. That's what you in your lifetime have the capacity to influence. And the traditional family is a structure which is intended to allow that kind of transmission. So the bases of the family, number one, being a man and a woman who are married for life. Of course, there is divorce, but the assumption is that almost everybody will be married for life. Number 2, children honor their parents, not just for the first 18 years, but children are supposed to honor their parents for their entire lives. And if you take just those 2 principles, that men and women marry for their entire lives and that children honor their parents for their entire lives, if you take just those 2 principles, then what you get is something that's very different from the nuclear family, because it immediately is connecting multiple generations. Since I'm going to keep honoring my parents, not just when I'm 18, but when I'm 28, when I'm 48, when I'm 68, I'm still going to be honoring my parents. Now, the key thing to understand that I think is usually left out of these discussions is that when you honor somebody, that is, honoring is not the same as obeying. When you honor somebody, you are making them feel as though they have influence. Okay, honoring means that whenever it's possible, you do the things that that your father and mother would like for you to do. When it's impossible, then you might not do what they'd like for you to do, but then you make sure to avoid offending them. You go out of your way in order to try to make sure that they understand how much you value their opinions. The concept of honoring is something that almost doesn't exist in liberal society, because liberalism is all about equality. And if you read Enlightenment rationalist thinkers, when you get to be 20 years old, you're supposed to be the equal of your parents. But in a traditional society, in Judaism, in the Tanakh and the Talmud, you're never, ever the equal of your parents. Your whole life, you have this obligation to make them feel like they're influencing you and the rest of the world. And the important thing to understand is that when you make somebody feel like they can influence, the main effect you're having is on yourself. You make it possible for you to learn from them. So if you're raised in a household where you always say yes, Abba, or yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, yes, Ima to your parents, that's different from an environment in which you're not trained to say that. Whenever you say yes, sir, or yes, Abba to your father, you concede a space in which he's not equal to you, in which you admit that your father is higher than you, and that he's always going to be higher than you for the rest of your life. That admission is the key to being able to transmit anything. In societies where children are taught to honor their parents, children are open to learning from their parents and their grandparents and their teachers and their society in general. And in societies where children are not taught to honor their parents, the children are unable to learn from their parents. And in fact, what happens is they reach adolescence and then get kind of full of themselves, because that's what adolescence is like. And then they never come back. And you can like lose an entire generation without the possibility of transmission just because of that.
Yoram, this is a very important point that you're now describing, that there is a correspondence between the animating values of a society and the form of the families that arise in that society. So that in a democratic culture, a culture that prizes equality and freedom of the kinds that we have in the United States and throughout the West, in such a culture, the family will tend to be more egalitarian. It will have a harder time sustaining the hierarchies that, in your analysis, families require in order for tradition to be passed on. It makes it seem like, if I follow your argument correctly, that there's something that traditional families have to do, a special mission that's incumbent upon them to be, in a way, countercultural in our societies.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, first of all, this is not really a new argument. I mean, you know that in Plato's Republic, the argument that in democracies, children stop respecting their parents or their teachers, and in fact, parents start wanting to flatter their children and to pretend that they're little, and teachers do the same thing. That argument is, it's more than 2,000 years old. But I think that that we as conservatives, looking at the society that we live in today, I mean, it's perfectly fine, as William Buckley famously said, to stand athwart history, shouting stop. But the question is, are conservatives actually doing the minimum things that you would need to do if you wanted to pass anything down? And unfortunately, I think that the answer is really no. I mean, I speak anecdotally. I haven't done statistical surveys of this, but it seems to me that the average person who's 30 or 35 years old, who is excited about the conservative movement and says, yeah, I'm a conservative, is not somebody who thinks that it's extremely urgent to reconnect himself or herself to the chain of transmission, to the great tradition that is supposed to be being conserved in Western countries. I mean, I think the basic problem is they think it's good enough. Many people seem to think it's good enough to just say, yes, I'm a conservative. I think conservatism is a good idea, but they don't actually think, well, I'd better get married. I'd better start having children. I'd better start keeping the Sabbath. I'd better learn the Bible. I'd better plug into, if I don't know how to do these things, I'd better plug into an Orthodox Jewish or Christian community where the traditions are still alive so that I can learn how to do these things. I mean, I know a great many wonderful young conservatives who are intellectually impressive and impassioned, but I don't see the drive to reconnect to the tradition in their personal lives. And I think that if you don't reconnect to the tradition yourself in your personal life, then you're not going to be able to conserve anything. It doesn't matter, that you can argue well about it.
Yoram, you were speaking a moment ago about the educative, formative function that a family can play. I want to enter back into that question. You spoke about honor, and I want to ask you what other virtues, maybe discuss honor, but also the other virtues that participation in a traditional family life cultivates, especially the virtues that are necessary to have healthy societies.
Okay, well, giving honor and being loyal, I think, are probably the two, honor and loyalty, I think, are the two central things that you see in every traditional society. Like, you go to any traditional society, whether it's Jewish or Christian or in some other nation, it can be Hindu or Muslim. The thing that you find in every traditional family that allows it to transmit things from the past is these two things: honor, which creates an inequality within the family. The children honor the parents honor the grandparents. Husbands honor wives, wives honor husbands. That's a little bit more complicated, but in our tradition, that's very clear. And the other part of it is loyalty. Let's ask the following as an example. Let's ask the following question: Why can't the average young man and young woman who want to get married and stay together for life, why can't they do it? I mean, maybe some of them can. But why is it? I mean, a lot of the reason that young people are scared to get married is because they believe that it's likely that they're going to fail. They look at their parents or their aunts and uncles, and they say this literally. They say to me, Yoram, come on, what are my chances of succeeding? I can't tell you how many times I've heard this at this point.
After all, looking around, as many families will become dissolute as families that will stay together in their generation. So it's a reasonable question to ask.
It's a completely reasonable question, but I don't see that people are giving reasonable answers to it. So here's the beginning of a reasonable answer. Okay, first of all, you have to forget about what the movies have to say about falling in love. I mean, that may or may not be an accurate depiction of what happens, during the first few months or the first couple of years. But any couple that stays married for decades knows that a marriage doesn't look anything like that, 10 years later. And so the central question that really should be asked is, what would you need to do in order to cause the marriage to be workable, right? And the answer is the first part is honor, right? That you have to honor your husband, you have to honor your wife. These are things that don't come naturally to people anymore. Honoring means that you make them feel like they have influence. That means you cannot, spend all your time correcting them and telling them what your opinion is and telling them how useless they are. We're kind of taught that everybody should be able to reason, and reasoning means that you tell the truth. I love the truth. I like the truth, but truth is not the number one thing that holds a marriage together. The number one thing that holds a marriage together is that 10 years later and 20 years later, you can say, my love, you did that terrifically. I still, I can't imagine living without you. And then your wife will say, well, why is that? And she'll say that because she doesn't get enough honor, and she has doubts about herself. And then you have to explain to her what's so great about her. Now, if this kind of knowing how to live within a marriage, knowing how to maintain a marriage so that it can stay for decades and decades for life, that kind of thing we never talk about. And I think if you did talk about it, then people would say, "Oh, come on, that's just flattery. I'd rather have an honest relationship." Okay, and honesty is important, but if you have honesty without honoring your spouse, then you will have honest fights and honest disagreements and honest pain that is never healed. And the honesty, which is in itself a good thing, will end up leading to an honest divorce, to two people saying, well, what can we do? Well, there was just no way for us to make it work. And the thing I want to hear conservatives talking about is how we need to learn to honor those people who are closest to us if we want the relationships to last. Now, let me say a word about loyalty.
Well, I want to come back to loyalty, Yoram, but as I think about what you've just said about the honor that takes place between a husband and wife, it seems to cultivate a kind of virtue that a wife and husband will also then carry into society. And for conservatives who, like me, are concerned about the tenor of our public discourse, about the actions of women and men in the public sphere, who wish that we had a kind of public spiritedness, a ability to make promises and follow through on promises that pertain outside of the marriage, but also, it seems like what you're describing is a way of forming the character of husbands and wives. It exercises a muscle that we then bring with us in other places that we go.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, the first place it should go is to the children. Children can only learn to honor their parents where the father honors the mother and the mother honors the father. If the children are watching the father and mother, having honest contempt for one another, then the children will have honest contempt. They'll never know how to honor their parents or their teachers. And you're absolutely right that this carries forth into society in general. Look, the most basic thing you need in order for a democracy to be able to hold together, it's really just like a marriage in a lot of ways. For two very different parties, conservative and liberal, which have very different worldviews, to be able to remain together in a national marriage, where they work together for the good of the nation, even though they disagree and even detest each other sometimes, that requires this same kind of thing. It requires the kind of customs where each political party knows that it has to do a minimum to honor the other political party and grant it legitimacy. Otherwise, the marriage of left and right won't be able to hold together, and you end up with civil war. All right, so you can easily see this. Just go back to the Kennedy-Nixon debates in the 1960s, or in 1960, or the Reagan-Carter debates in 1980. Pay attention to this thing. What's the atmosphere? Now, those people may have detested one another. They certainly thought it would be a disaster if the other side won the election, just like we do today. But pay attention to the way that they are constantly careful to say encouraging positive things about the other side, to make it seem like it just wouldn't be the end of the world if the other side won the election. Now, they really want to win the election. But this is not just a matter of politeness. It's not just, yes, they were more polite than we are. That's true. But it's not about politeness. It's about understanding that honoring the other side is what you need to do to hold the relationship together, to make it possible to live together. So today, you get the Democrats and the Republicans. They're much more honest now. They say everything that they think. Whatever they think, in any words that they think, with whatever emotions and whatever curse words, whatever they think, it's on Twitter. So you can say it's more honest. But you can see that it's cultivating hatred, not loyalty, not mutual loyalty, not an ability to stay together, but a train wreck that's coming. Let's think for a moment about what do we want a husband to do when we say we want him to be loyal, we want him to be faithful to his wife. They're going to get married when they're 20 years old or 30 years old or 40 years old. They'll get married. And then for the next 70 or 80 years, you want this husband to be faithful to his wife. You want the wife to be faithful to her husband. Right? He's going to, they'll go off to all sorts of situations. They'll attend, political conservatism conferences, and there'll be younger men and women there, and there'll be late night in the bar. You want them to be loyal under these extremely challenging circumstances. So, what are you actually asking? What you're actually asking is, inside the personality of, let's just take a man speaking at a convention, right? And he's given a good speech, and let's say that some young woman walks up to him and asks to talk to him privately. Right at that moment, many men, maybe most men, are really excited that this young woman wants to talk wants to have this conversation. But we have something that we want this older man who's married to say. We want him to say, let's just talk for a couple of minutes here. We don't need to go to the bar. You want him to turn down the approach. Now, in order for him to do that, inside of him, he has to think, when his wife is flashing through his mind at that moment, and I promise you that she is, he has to feel that his wife really wants him, and that he really wants her. He has to be reminded that there's something important there that he needs to be loyal to. Okay, and what I'm proposing is that if his wife keeps telling him, in words and in deeds, how important he is, and how successful he is in her eyes, and how good he is, in addition to the occasional criticisms and working things through, then that honoring, that sequence of having been honored time and again and made to feel important and significant by your wife, at that moment, when you think of your wife, you think, I'm important to her. And that makes you desire your wife. It makes you feel like your wife is important to you. And that understanding that loyalty under duress, loyalty under situations where you're being tested, loyalty comes from being honored. It's very difficult for anybody. All right. To go to your political example again, it's very difficult to get Republicans to want to stay in the same political system, in the same country with Democrats, if they feel like they're just being attacked and abused all the time. And the same is true in the reverse. Exactly the same thing is true in a husband and wife. If what you feel is that you're not good enough, and you're just always doing the wrong thing, and what did I do this time? And you're not understood and you're not appreciated, then the moment that some other nice woman comes along and starts really appreciating you, you feel like, wow, why shouldn't I be where I'm appreciated? So,
sorry, I'm gone.
So this is something that, when do conservatives talk about this? This is a very practical thing for how to keep a marriage together and how to be able to raise children and how to be able to have a strong country, is not always saying the insulting, hurtful, truthful thing that you happen to be thinking, but find a way to make sure that there's somebody you want to be loyal to you. So how about if you express to them how important and significant they really are?
I want to just zoom out and make a point for our listeners and our audience, because I think what Yoram Hazony has done here, my friends, is reverse some of the most important ways of thinking about the relation between public life and the family. In the nuclear family that Yoram described earlier, Yoram, you'll correct me about this in just a moment. In the nuclear family that Yoram described earlier, the template for the relationship between husbands and wives and parents and children was the liberal state, because the roots of that relationship had to do with consent, the very mechanism that connects citizens to a liberal state. And the ground of that relationship was equality. So that as long as parents and children consented, while they were unequal by nature, and then when they grow to a natural equality, they could change the calculus of their consent, they could then break apart. Nothing was holding them together eternally. It was always provisional, based on their best assessment of their own personal interest. That's not the way we usually think about the nuclear family, but I think that Yoram has tried to describe it in that way, and it's worth thinking about. Whereas the reverse has now taken place. In example after example, Yoram has now described the traditional family as the grounds for thinking about the nation. Not the state as a grounds for thinking about the family, but the family as the grounds for thinking about the nation. A nation is, as Yoram has described it for us, outgrowth, a template of the virtues that are cultivated in the family. And if we cultivate those virtues in the seedbed of the family, we'll then have the civic assets that we need to enter into politics, enter into the public square, with our souls and characters formed in the right way to actually be democratic citizens in a healthy nation.
Wow, I think that's beautifully said.
Yoram, is that the right way to understand the role that the family plays in the life of a nation?
I think that's the right way to understand. It still may be possible to get you on as a co-author for the book. I don't think it's gone to press yet.
Yoram, the last big subject that I want to ask you about, we don't have that much time, is of course we are not only conservatives together at this conference who are interested in learning about conservative ideas, we are particularly interested in the relationship that conservative ideas have to Judaism and the Jewish tradition. And I wonder, in your view, what kind of moral resources does the Jewish tradition offer to us as we try to restore the health of the family in trying to restore the health of our nations?
Well, to begin with, the first major resource that Judaism offers is the Tanakh, is the Hebrew Bible. And I think, as you know, one of the things I think are most unfortunate about the way that public education is after the banning of the Bible in the 1960s in America. And the truth is the way universities are, in which the Bible is held in such low esteem, almost universally in academia. One of the big consequences is that we don't study the Bible in order to understand what kind of politics it's teaching. Now, if you did study the Bible, like if you regularly read the Bible the way that our ancestors did, then or the way people still do in Orthodox communities and maybe a couple of other places, then what you'll see if you ask this question, what kind of a politics is being described, the first thing that you'll notice is what we're calling the traditional society is the society that's being described in the Bible. In other words, a man marries a woman and they have children, but that's what you call the template for the relationship among clans. Clans are like extended families in which the children grow up and they get married and they have children and they're all one big. In Hebrew today we say chamula. The old word is a clan. It's an extended family which you can have if people are having a lot of children and if they don't move to the other side of the country as soon as they reach the age of 18. And then those clans make up tribes and those tribes make up nations. That's the structure of politics in the Hebrew Bible. Families make up clans, clans make up tribes, tribes make up nations. And at every level in that structure, these same issues of honor and dishonor, creating loyalty and disloyalty. How do you keep the conflicting interests from tearing the family apart, tearing the tribe apart, tearing the nation apart? Those are the central political questions in the Hebrew Bible. There's all sorts of other interesting questions, but if you want to talk about political questions, That's the dead center, what is being discussed. And Moses and the prophets, what they give us is views to what you need to do to hold a family together, to hold a nation together. The kinds of things we're talking about, I think, are very easy to talk about when you are in a society where people are reading the Bible all the time and thinking about these things. And they're very hard to talk about when people are just reading Enlightenment liberalism and Enlightenment rationalist philosophy, which doesn't recognize the existence of these issues.
My friends, family formation is simply the most important domestic policy issue confronting our political life today in the United States, in Israel, and throughout the West. In order to understand the deeper significance of what family formation means, Yoram Hazony, we're so grateful to have you with us and for helping us understand it.
Thank you very much.